If this, and this are considered street photography, then what's this? Street photography is something that's technically been around for over 100 years, but it seems like in the last decade or so it's gotten kind of a bad reputation based largely on eccentric characters, invasive practices, and really cringy videos on YouTube and TikTok and stuff. But I'm not really here to talk about that. Well, I guess I do say that because I think the aforementioned factors have always made me kind of shy away from conventional street photography and to do anything to avoid to call myself a street photographer. Even though, by all admission, I've done a lot of street photography. I don't like admitting that, but it's pretty evident right here. And I think it's because of that stigma. I've leaned away from calling myself a street photographer or even really shooting anything that would resemble street photography. Instead, I've been doing this. I would call this highway photography. It's adjacent to street photography, but it's generally kind of different. Whereas street photography usually takes place in more of an urban setting and usually focuses on getting people in it on some level. This is kind of the exact opposite. These are photos all taken in fairly remote places with no people around, and usually not much more than a few signs, a building, and a highway. So I've taken to calling it highway photography. And this is a little hobby of mine I've been working on. I guess you could maybe go so far as to say this is a project, but I don't know if I would really say it's codified into a proper project at this point in time. It's just something I like doing. I thought I would just make this a little video and show you because I don't really use Instagram, but I thought it would be interesting to throw out some of these photos in a series where you can kind of see the cohesive nature of them, and I could also have some time to kind of explain them and why I like them, and why I don't call it street photography. I think it's kind of fair to say that genres in art are a thing that is always kind of divisive, and I think as time goes on, they seem to get less and less important. You had entire generations that were defined by pretty much one genre, and that's not really true anymore. I don't know if it has to do with the rise of the internet or if it's, because people are just getting into more things. Maybe it's even just the fact that photography and stuff has become so much more prevalent over the last 30 years than it ever was, that it just opens a lot of new doors for new people and brings in a lot of new perspectives. I think it's probably a little bit of all of that, but it's kind of hard to really give one particular factor all the credit or pick one out above all the others that's more important. I've never really considered myself a genre photographer. I've never really considered myself to have a strong style, and I think that is both a blessing and a curse, but that could be a whole nother discussion right there. I generally consider myself to just be a photographer, a pretty average one at that. I wouldn't say I'm bad, but at the same time, I would say a lot of my work is kind of average and maybe not the most ambitious. So as I kind of said earlier, this project was basically just a consequence of where I lived. There's a lot of empty highways around here. You can kind of just explore. You can't really get lost. There's not too many alternate roads, but you can just drive down these highways for hours and you'll find all sorts of interesting little sights and scenes, abandoned buildings. You'll find buildings that are closed but not quite abandoned. And you'll see all sorts of little roadside attractions and little roadside shops and things of that nature. And I like photographing this stuff. There's not a ton of people who seem to go around and photograph a lot of these places, and I suspect not too many people go to a lot of these places. So I kind of enjoy the rare opportunity to get a peek at these places and kind of record them and present them to the rest of the world. Now, admittedly, this project is kind of two things I hate to admit that it really is. I would argue that in some ways it is kind of street photography because it's kind of naturalistic outdoor photography. I think you could also kind of class it as a type of landscape photography. But I don't know if it would fall into some subgenre of landscape photography or not. And secondly, it's a series of photos that is dramatically lacking in any sort of portrait work or any sort of human element whatsoever. And as much as I think a human element is pretty important to a photo, I do like the fact that these photos are kind of desolate and empty, and that with most of them it seems like there should be people in them, but there aren't really. And you can definitely see traces of people being there not long ago, or you can see a building and you can probably assume there's one or two people in that building, but you can't technically see them, which is kind of an interesting juxtaposition of photography. A lot of times it leaves you to assume a lot of things that are probably true, but you don't really have absolute proof of. So if you've watched my other videos, you've probably seen the photo project video that came out not long ago, and probably remember me referencing another project I was working on that was kind of the opposite of the one I talked about and showed little tidbits of, and this is it right here. And I think in a way it's a very interesting opposite because, the other project has a lot of black and white. It's actually all black and white, where this project is all color and I think has fairly dramatic colors in a lot of instances. And the other project has definitely some empty landscapes and stuff, but you see quite a few people here and there. There's, some sort of action shots and some sort of portrait stuff. But there definitely are some that are sort of empty highways and segments of fence and stuff like that. But this is kind of the opposite. It's pretty much all just the scenery, just the buildings, and not much else. And I think that is kind of an interesting duality right there. And that's kind of what I was referring to before when I said I don't think I really have much of a style, and that's both a positive and a negative. It's a positive in that you can do a lot of different things, but it's also a negative in that I think if you saw some of my photos in an isolated incident and then sometime later, maybe just a couple of days, maybe months later, you saw some other photos from a different project or in a different circumstance, you probably wouldn't really be able to link the two together by any sort of common thread, either visually or even thematically, I guess. And I feel like in some ways that's a positive. It gives you a lot of freedom to do stuff. But in the other way, it's kind of a negative because everybody nowadays is on about branding and having some unique style and everything. And it's kind of antithetical to that. But at the same time, that's the way I like to work. I don't really, I'm not going to mince my words. I'm not going to offer any excuses. That's just what I like to do. I think there's a lot of power in having some duality. It gives you a lot of flexibility and freedom, even if in exchange you do kind of sacrifice a little bit of a unique touch or some sort of hyper branded touch where it's very distinctly yours and no one else's. And I know a lot of people would disagree with me there, and that's fine. But that's just the way I feel, and that's how I like to work. Well, I don't really have much more to say in this video, so I might just show you a few more photos and then I'll call it a day. And, at some point I might have to put together an Instagram or something to actually display these. I have a website I've kind of been working on. If I had a sponsorship from a certain website designer, that probably would have been done by now, but unfortunately things aren't always that easy. But stay tuned for some more, and get out there and just try to shoot every once in a while. Don't spend too